I'm extremely humbled, as you just heard, these introductions of these people and everybody that's here, and all the people that work so hard to put this together. It's the kind of thing that we all have a talent, and I would think back in our villages, everybody had the thing that they did, and sometimes I struggle to figure out what my talent would be, but it takes a lot of people to put something like this together and a lot of things. And so I appreciate everybody that's helped to do this, the cooks, the Carrie, all the people that support this, including all of you for being here. So yesterday we took a big walk in the woods down at the community park, and we're looking at places that we could get started with cultural burning here in southern Humboldt. So that's kind of the theme of what my story is today. But I'm going to start with a different story, kind of where I got to be here. My grandmother, my great-grandmother, they were from Hayfork, and they're Wintu Indian. Like I said before, I look like I'm a Viking. I have a little bit of Viking blood as well. So, but raised with an Indian grandmother, pretty much saved my life, but also just really gave me a gift of being able to see things the way I think a lot of our ancestors looked at things. When I was in high school, really young in high school, I grew up here in Redway, went to Miranda, and South Fork High School. We had a shop teacher, and that shop teacher, Jack King, and I think a few of you guys here might remember Jack King, but he was a little bit crazy, and he was actually a fisherman in Alaska in the summertime when school was out. And he thought outside the box. And so he decided to create a little club, a fishing club. And of course, we all loved growing up fishing. So he decided to take us to the Marble Mountains after school got out. So the day after school got out, we all jumped in a little short school bus and headed to the Marble Mountains. I'm not sure he had permission to take the school bus, but we ended up in the Marble Mountains, and we spent about 10 days up there. And we got into learning about backpacking, and it was just an absolute wonderful introduction for me, because when you get into the high country, and some of that is tribal land from where Kathy's from, it's kind of untouched, and it takes us back to that feeling of where our culture used to be. And so Jack King had us up in the mountains. And of course, 10 days, we ran out of food about the third day, but we did find an old Forest Service cabin, and we were able to break into that thing and eat a lot of the canned food there, and left a note about being up there in the middle of winter and the big survival story. But I think everybody kind of looks, and over the years, there's a movie that came out called The Wild or something like this, and about a woman that went hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. And a lot of people go into the wilderness to find themselves. And sometimes just getting away from the world we live in helps us all to do that. Because here we stand, microphones, electricity, all these things, and sometimes that distracts us, and inside of us we all kind of long to still belong to that place. So in the Marble Mountains and Trinity Alps, I found that I was really happy up there, and I really got my feet on the ground. And so every year, and still today, so over 50 years, I've been going into the wilderness areas the day after school gets out, and I've taken my kids up there and my nephews and all kinds of folks and introduced them to the wilderness. And we do a lot of cultural education, so to speak, while we're up there, building fires without matches, different things like this, which is a lot of fun. And sure takes away from the video games, you know. So over the years, my mother would watch us go, and she always envied us going up into the mountains. We'd come back with pretty neat photographs. And she grew up over a little bit in her younger childhood was in the Weed, Mount Shasta area. And being native back in the 30s, 40s, it was really tough on the kids and on all of them. And my grandparents couldn't find jobs as Native Americans over there, so they learned to speak Spanish so they could travel with the Mexican crews through the Sacramento Valley picking fruit. Mom said it was pretty fun, but when you live about a week on strawberries, your butt really hurts. And it didn't help that the Mexican women would bring beans over to help give them some nutrition. So the stories that she would tell of the childhood were, you know, pretty interesting because we lived a whole different life. And so she was starting to show signs of Alzheimer's. And I'm watching her start to decline. And she really wanted to go into the mountains. And I always wondered if that was someplace that we should take an Alzheimer patient into the wilderness area. And I talked to my kids and nephews, and they said, yeah, let's take her up there. So we did. And the first thing we had to unload was her backpack that she couldn't understand why she couldn't take a curling iron because she wanted to look nice when she got up there. And we got her up in there. And it was amazing to watch the transformation because all of a sudden it seemed like she didn't have Alzheimer's as bad as she did when she lived down in town. And it was something that we kind of talked about, geez, she seems to be able to do all the things and she doesn't just look into space. And it was during the second day I took the kids, we went up to another little lake and we fished. That's what we lived on mostly. It was the fish we caught up there. And I worried about leaving Mom alone in camp, but she said she was fine and she was showing the indications that she was doing a lot better. And maybe it's the fresh air or what, I guess higher elevation, lack of oxygen, maybe that too much oxygen down low, I don't know. But we went up there and we were fishing in a lake up above and getting ready to leave. And of course, the kids were all pretty rowdy. And there's an old man sitting by a tree as we're leaving. And I went over and I apologized for all the racket and disruption in this most peaceful place. And I got looking at his outfit there, and he had an old wooden pack frame with a gunny sack tied to it and a bamboo fishing rod leaning against a tree. And he seemed really, really nice. And I talked with him for a few minutes and kind of asked him, you don't seem to have much camping gear. And he says, oh, I'm fine. And we talked a minute longer, and he says, I'm from the Wintu tribe. I said, oh, this is amazing. So I have Wintu ancestry as well. And I said, actually, we got to get down and take care of my mom down at the other lake. And why don't you come down and meet her, and we'll make supper. And we headed down there. And when they looked at each other, they realized they were cousins. And his name was Coyote Bob. And as we sat there that evening, he told the stories of how he got the name. I told you about how poor kids can be. These kids were really poor. And they grew up together. And he always wanted a puppy. But his parents said they didn't have money to feed another mouth. You know, things were really tight, so you can't have a puppy. So he always wandered in the woods, and he found a coyote den. So we brought himself his own puppy home and raised that puppy downstairs underneath the house, a little crawl space. And that worked out pretty well till the fall and a full moon, and then you know exactly what happened. And as soon as the puppy started singing the coyote song, they had to load up and take the puppy out into the mountains and turn him loose. This happened for a couple years in a row. And finally, Coyote Bob decided that he wanted to wander out into the mountains and look for his coyote pups. And so he spent the next 60 years wandering the Trinity Alps and Marble Mountains and hanging out with the pups that he had raised, I guess. But he was an interesting character. And while we talked at the campfire, he showed me, as we looked out across the lakes, the kind of views that our ancestors would have. And this is one of them. If you get up early in the morning and you take a look, you start seeing things that haven't changed in many, many, many years. And I told him that I was a firefighter and that I really wanted to not see the country burn up. And he talked a lot about how the stories are that we used to burn a lot. And then once that was taken away, we start looking at the devastation. And in fact, he said that he signs his name everywhere with ink on all the lightning trees because he honored the lightning in the high country. And the natives have a lot of story about lightning in the high country and the fires that used to happen. And they weren't bad fires. And so today we're talking about good fires, and those were the good fires. I asked him why he didn't carve his name in the trees, and he said, because nothing like that's supposed to last forever. And so that story just kind of evolves into the fact that while we sat there and while I sit there in the wilderness areas, and I look at this and I think for hundreds and hundreds of years, our ancestors saw these same views. And there's trails that go through here that are hundreds and hundreds of years old. So my Alzheimer's mother gets back home, and she has this picture that she took, or that I took, and she put it like this. She didn't realize that it was a lake and a reflection. She thought it was a picture of an eagle or something. And so to her, it was like this. And each time I would go to her house, she would tip it a different way because it had a different meaning. But she thought it was pretty magical. So when you get up in the morning in the high country, these are some of the things you get to see. And I appreciate my mom's cousin, Coyote Bob, for kind of opening that little world up, because all through Siskiyou County at all the little post offices, he didn't have good words, but he said the lady at Etna gave him a camera and he started to take photos that would have more than words. So these are the kind of things that we want to revive and try to relive. So that's my little story of some of my family and how we grew up through the years and little magical times that happen. And especially if we put ourselves out into nature. I'm going to take a little journey here now with this technology thing, which I don't do really well with. And so bear with me as we click along, and I'll tell a story with each one of these little slides. So when we look out over our country, this is what we see. And it's almost a similar view for thousands of years. Do you agree that this is a beautiful part of the world? And it's been managed to be kind of like this. But what's happened is it hasn't been managed in a cultural way, which is starting to become a real problem, and something that Kathy will talk about a lot, is the encroachment of the conifers now are starting to take over the oak woodlands. And this was beautiful oak woodland lands. And so in this ancestral home, Wailaki, we're all working together to bring cultural fire back into this area. And being a firefighter, these are the things that I'm starting. I drove through this when it was still burning. There were still people in cars. Go ahead to the next one. And you could see the heat, the ungodly heat of the fire. And so we took bulldozers and went down the street to open it up so we could get into there. And there were heroic actions taken by firefighters to save people. Some people died. But this is the kind of thing we're seeing that's become common. And so we've lost the balance. We've completely lost the balance. of what our world is supposed to look like. I'm sure there were devastating fires back in the days, but we're really, really wanting to create a different world, and being part of that is one of my goals. So over the years, we've had fire suppression, a lot of fuel loading, and what you're talking about earlier with the drought conditions, we've had these gigafires. So that led up to the August complex. And the August complex came right into our back door. 1 million acres, 1 million acre fire. Who would have ever thought that? I mean, right now, I read a story the other day about the Mendocino National Forest. In the last 5 years, 88% of the forest has burnt in 5 years. And so I'm not sure if you guys know, but something's wrong. Do you agree? And what are they doing for restoration? We forgot that part. But we really start to need to bring the balance back. So I'm not sure you could see it, but this is the middle of the day up at the August complex at Kettenpalm. And I was given a division of that fire on the first day. So this is the Bryceland Fire Department and some of our local fire people. Camilo, who helped put this slideshow together, and his wife, and a lot of the people here today were on that fire. And it was something that we don't really want to see happen again, okay? So this is right in our backyard, and this is ancestral lands. Kettenpalm is a Wintu word for the Camas place. And so the Wintu and Wailaki shared ground. So this is right on the border of where they would have shared that ground. And you could see this is in the middle of the day. So something is catastrophically wrong. Go ahead. Over the last few years, we've worked really diligently locally with the Humboldt County Prescribed Burn Association. And they're one of the first burn associations, I believe the first in the United States. And we have a little group, side group off of it called the Southern Humboldt Prescribed Burn Association. And I was just appointed recently as the cultural advisor for the Southern Humboldt Prescribed Burn Association. So it starts to build this thing to where when we do prescribe fire, it's now going to start evolving into the cultural world. So you could see this is an example of the amount of little Douglas firs. Everybody sees the Christmas trees in the meadows. They're not supposed to be there. And so by burning, we're able to take those out. Fire is a tool. Fire is one of the things, and Kathy will talk about it more, and Brian, of how it's used and how it's managed and how our people are going to do the same. And so, yes, this is the Humboldt County Prescribed Burn Association, and it was the first PBA formed in the Western United States, and I'm part of it, and probably 10 or 15 people here are part of that. And so we've already got a little bit of a start with the prescribed fire. And so our goal is now to evolve into cultural fire. And so here's the Southern Humboldt chapter. And this is us last year. We had a dry January, if you guys remember. And do you see what good fire looks like compared to the first pictures I showed you of Paradise? This is what we're hoping to do, is this oak woodlands. We're able to burn low and slow. In fact, this is the landowner. And believe it or not, he donated some of the food for today. So a lot of our local people are really getting interested as well as invested in prescribed fire and cultural fire. And we're really excited to be working with them. Here's another example, lighting fire through the oak woodlands. Fire is it's a cleansing tool. It's when it's used inappropriately or when it's allowed to do things like the pictures earlier, that's devastation. But as a cleansing tool, it creates better habitat and a lot more life, not only for us, but for all the other critters that are around. So another example, can you see the fire up into the oak tree? And what happens once we took fire away, these meadows used to burn every year or every couple of years. The native people would burn because the acorns, everything is good. A lot of our oak trees are starting to die a lot. And one thing that happens is the moss is really super thick on some of them. And inside the moss are little bugs. And the birds can't see those bugs. And eventually the bugs find a place they could get into the tree, and then they start to kill it. And so by some of the moss being gone, makes it so the birds see the bugs, and that big circle starts to happen. So there's an example of all the moss burning out of a tree. I think you could see how controlled this is and how we all work kind of in a system to let the fire back down and consume the materials without it being a real hot fire. This is a real cool kind of fire. So we're able, in our experience, be able to, like my experience, I'm able to do hot fire or cold fire or medium fire, whatever the ground is wanting. So we also work a lot to do in timberland. And a lot of our land's been logged over. And the second growth has taken over. And it's created a huge fuel loading. So when we do cultural fire, prescribed fire, part of it is to reduce that fuel loading. And so this is an example of another place right up here on Old Bryson Road that we did. And we were reducing the fuel loading here. And again, you could see how controlled it is. This is Camilo's wife, Ingrid. She actually went up to the river and became part of the treks up there with you guys earlier in the year. And so by using prescribed fire, we're actually able to get a lot of depth into our firefighters. So to give you an example, last year, our prescribed fire in southern Humboldt, we burned over 150 acres. And so it's a really, really good start to where we're headed. And this is an example of it. And so what it does is it gives us a lot of experience about working up close to fire, so some of our new people aren't going to be afraid. They'll know how fire works, because fire, again, is a tool. You could see it has movement, it has a voice. And these are things, like I said earlier, we want to listen to and work with. So again, taking out some of the fuel loading, you could see a lot of the country that we live in looks like this. So our goal is to create a little bit of mortality. So we're going to kill some of the trees, but we're also taking out the fuel loading. And so if a fire does happen, it's going to be a cooler fire. It won't be as devastating. And there's a picture of all of us working. And I'm really bossy and talk a lot about things when we're out there. And we were all having a snack and lit off the top of this little hill. And one of the girls there, it was her very first prescribed fire. Actually, she's from Pennsylvania. It was her very first fire. And a couple of the trees that right after this picture was taken burst into flame. And we all kept eating our sandwiches. And she was running for her life, thinking that the world had just come to an end. And she looked at us and said, "This is not bad." And it's like, no, this is good. This is good fire. And so these are the things that we're really going to work with over the next years to bring our young people and all of you into the same kind of program. Does that look controllable? It looks good, huh? And after it burns, the next spring, it's the Garden of Eden. Again, more photos. You could see, if we just leave the land, you could see how the fuel loading all through our country, that's why we end up with these massive fires. So we're able to use fire to reduce the fuel loading. This wasn't a cultural fire, it was a prescribed fire. And yet, cultural things happen. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. Again, you could see how we put little strips of fire, and what I'm explaining here is we have to manage our smoke. We have to do more than just burn stuff. We have to manage the land and manage a lot of things. So I'm explaining to our firefighter that by putting that strip of fire there, the fire up above is actually pulling all of that to it, right? And so when it does, it makes the smoke go up a little bit higher so we don't impact town. And that's a big part of what we're not supposed to do, is impact the communities these days. So in our prescribed fire and cultural fire, we also have a lot of habitat. And a big part of what we do is the monitoring. And it's going to be before we burn, we go through and we find and we flag everything we want to keep, because this is not only to benefit people, but like I said earlier, the animals that live there. And you could see we burned all around, but we were able to save the little woodpecker tree. And we continue to do that. So there's people here that we're going to have work with us to help us do these things, monitor these things. I think Serenity is interested in that. And so what we do is we can go before and after the fires and make sure that things are the way they're supposed to be for not only us, but for the animals. So last year, out of the blue, we thought, gee, we're doing a prescribed burn in July, and I'd been hanging out with Perry Lincoln and some other folks for a while, and I decided maybe we should invite them to a prescribed fire. And so this is a picture of Perry's family as we start to get ready to burn. You could see this is Star's very first time. Where's Star? There you are. Did you enjoy that? And so what happened is, without a big introduction, we've already started. My talk was bringing cultural fire back to Southern Humboldt. I want to show you, we've started. We're on the way, and so this is a great example. This is a great example of where we're headed. And this was last year in July. And again, I'm probably yelling at her about something, and I see her. But it's something that our experiences as firefighters were able to evolve into now cultural fire pretty smoothly. And so, again, Star is lighting. You could see the grass is taller than she is, and it was July 19th, so it was pretty hot. Were you scared? Yeah, she was a little nervous, but she wasn't scared because she was with us, and we take good care of people, huh? And so it was very controllable. Again, culturally, we did this fire to control rattlesnakes because a little girl got bit by a rattlesnake, and the rattlesnakes live at people's house. And there's every year rattlesnakes coming, and finally the girl got bit and almost died. And so the family is like, how do we get rid of the rattlesnakes from being in the yard? And we decided that the rattlesnakes are living on rodents, and the rodents live in that tall grass. So we took out the tall grass, and the rodents moved away, and the birds could get the rodents, and the rattlesnakes followed the rodents where they went to the other tall grass away from the house. And so there was the first year in their memory on this property, they found no rattlesnakes this summer. So it actually worked. And our goals are to take properties like this with Brian and go replant with native species after they burn. So this is the after party, and you'll recognize some of the folks there are here today, and they helped present this gathering. So these are the things I'm trying to say, is that we've already started to work towards our cultural fire program in Southern Humboldt by using the PBA, and it really gives us a head start because we're working on a lot of private land. And so at this time we have 4, possibly 5 prescribed fires. That'll be a lot of cultural people involved, and it's going to be a couple of them are going to be full cultural burns, which would mean that Indigenous people, local indigenous people, are there for the pre-planning, for planning the burn, preparation of the burn, doing the burn themselves, and the upkeep after the burn. So we're pretty excited to already have that under our wings and ready for this coming year. So, of course, this is Natasha, who you met a little bit earlier, and she was also there at the cultural burn, or our burn we did. And you could see how, again, it takes, it takes a village to do a cultural burn. So we're all going to be working together to make this happen. So this last summer, late in the summer, Perry took me and a few others, and we went up into Southfork Mountain after the August complex, and you saw the Million Acre Fire and how devastating it was. And we're coming back. We went up and got bear grass. That's these earrings that the granddaughters made for me from the bear grass right above where this is. This is on top of Southfork Mountain. And everywhere you look, the trees are burnt to a crisp. It's just little black stubs. But you look and you see this. And the old timers say this spring hasn't ran in 50 years. You see? So once the trees up through there burned, the water came back. And we talk about the water and how to bring the water back. And sometimes it's bringing that balance back by some of these trees being burned actually created this. And I don't know if you could see grandmother in there. Can anybody see that? Huh? Uh-huh. They're smiling because the water is coming back. And that's, I guess, an example of the devastation that we see sometimes. There's more to it if we look a little bit deeper. I think I want to leave you guys kind of with that, is even though the August complex right in our back door completely devastated the mountains, this is what's coming back. And so we'll take this and run with it. And I thank Perry for taking me up there and the girls for the bear grass. And I thank each one of you guys for being here today and listening to the story. Thank you.